Okay, my name is Bob Freeman. I'm the chairman of the 2001 International Space Development Conference. I'd like to welcome all of you here to Albuquerque, and we would like to especially welcome you on behalf of the two host organizations for this year's conference, the Albuquerque section of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and the New Mexico Space Society, which is a chapter of the NSS. I'm an engineer, aerospace engineer for SAIC here in Albuquerque. And again, we'd like to really thank you for your participation in this year's ISDC. I have a few announcements to make before we get going. Tonight's Progression of Human Spaceflight dinner that features Harrison Schmitt, Sid Gutierrez, and a very recent addition, Andrew Thomas. Dr. Thomas is an Australian astronaut who performed an EVA on the space station assembly mission just about 2 months ago. And he'll be narrating highlights of that mission. He also spent 4 months aboard Mir in 1998. So if you intend to purchase tickets for that dinner, please do so possibly during the coffee break or within the next couple hours if possible. We are looking for volunteers to play different roles in a Mars medical emergency simulation that will be running Saturday afternoon, and Eleanor Rangers is running that, and there's a sign-up sheet in the registration area. There's also a raffle that we have in there. I don't know if anybody saw it, but we have a really nice autographed picture of Jack Schmitt with some Apollo 17 memorabilia, and just wanted to let you know that's also in the registration area. There's a form in the registration area for any of you that are attending the 2001 Space Odyssey banquet. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Keir DeLay, Robert McCall, Fred Ordway, or Dan Richter, those pages are over in the registration area, and we'll pick 5 or 6 of them that we'll ask during the banquet. Anybody who has an interest in space science education is welcome to attend the NASA Moon Rock certification course. It's 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. this afternoon. That's of course for teachers, but it's also for anybody who's interested in space science. At the end of it, you'll be certified to handle moon rock samples and for educational purposes in your local schools. Every day there's going to be a few minor changes here and there to the program. Just be sure and check the pages that we put in the just outside the doors. That's the most up-to-date information, a little bit different than what you see in your program book. But for today, it's just a couple of really minor changes. That's it for the announcements. Now I'll introduce our honorary chairman. Dr. Harrison Schmitt is a New Mexico native. He earned his bachelor's degrees from the California Institute of Technology and his PhD in geology from Harvard. During the Apollo 17 mission in December of '72, Harrison Schmitt and Dean Cernan conducted 3 lunar rover excursions over 3 days. Dr. Schmitt served as a senator from New Mexico. He was inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame in 1997. Dr. Schmitt is an adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he serves on the NSS Board of Governors. And with that, I'll turn the program over to Dr. Schmitt.
Thank you, Bob. The nice thing about being an honorary chairman is you don't have to do anything except introduce honored guests and also compliment the real workers like Bob and his team that have made it very successful. I thought yesterday's entrepreneurial session that George Freiberg put together went extremely well, and we're particularly gratified at Jim Papite's planetary session. That was an extraordinarily large group, and maybe it's something we ought to think about for future programs. This morning we're honored to have with us and privileged to listen to Peter Schwartz. Peter is a co-founder and chairman of the Global Business Network. He is an internationally renowned futurist and business strategist, and I strongly recommend that you look through his biography that you will find in the program. Of particular interest is that he served as a script consultant on the films Deep Impact, War Games, and Sneakers, and will also be involved in the upcoming movie, The Minority Report, soon to be released as a Spielberg movie. And those of you who enjoy Spielberg's work will now know someone who is the power behind the throne. So Peter, we're looking forward to your remarks, and good luck.
Thank you. This is familiar ground for me. I'm pleased to be back here, not only in Albuquerque, but among all of you. My background is as an aeronautical engineering astronautics. I had the privilege actually of working on the Apollo capsule that you rode in many years ago. But I don't want to talk about the past. I want to talk about the future. And what I'm going to talk about are some of the surprising possibilities that may shape the potential for spaceflight, for aerodynamics, for the demand and supply of science and technology in the future. There are three really big drivers of change that I want to talk about today. The first is science and technology itself. Second is economics. And third is geopolitics. And there's some big surprises coming in all of those domains that could lead many of the elements of the conventional wisdom about the future to be wrong. First and foremost, that we can take reality for granted. We know what's real, and of course, that's going to stay fairly stable. And so the rules of physics, the rules of reality, that's pretty well set. So we can take reality for granted. Not. I think there's a pretty good chance that we need to rethink some fundamental questions, and I'll come back to that. Second is that the era of prosperity is over. America's peaked. It's all downhill from here. How many of you believe that the lives of your children will be worse than your own? Right. You got one hand back there. When I ask a lot of audiences around America these days, I get most hands going up. People have lost faith in the future. And I want to suggest that there's good reason to believe that tomorrow will be a lot better than today. And there is part of the conventional wisdom is that the U.S. is the new hegemonic power in the world. Well, I'm going to look at several of the different possible scenarios that would challenge all the elements of that conventional wisdom. First, I want to begin with science and technology. Now, there will be many developments that we can think of as the extensions of conventional science. We can see that in space flight and aerodynamics, in propulsion systems, that the next two generations of rocket technology are likely to be based on conventional technology, things where we understand the science mostly today. I'm excited about things like the HyperX program, and most of these are old ideas, but that are newly possible because of materials, computer science, the ability to model and simulate in ways we couldn't before, and so on. The ability to use exotic fuels, things like pulse detonation systems, and many more. But all of these are mostly the extensions of science that we already know. The real future may be much more different than we think today, and may require a great leap of imagination. Indeed, I think there's a pretty good chance that today we are at a moment in time very much like the beginning of the last century. And you can imagine if we'd been sitting here in 1901 thinking about the future, well, we'd be pretty confident. We know, for example, that manned flight was impossible. That was now a pretty clear consensus, that the idea of heavier than air craft was just simply not plausible. Most physicists agree on this. The American Physical Society had reached the conclusion that we were going to have a surplus of physicists because all the questions had been answered. There wasn't really anything left to be done. There was this odd thing called the photoelectric effect, one or two little anomalies that had to be closed down. But once that was settled, we pretty well had a picture of reality. Then along came some guys named Einstein and Bohr and Wright, and one or two more, and suddenly, literally, the universe was stood on its head. The potentials of what was possible were transformed, and reality changed. And I think we may be in a similar moment today. You know, imagine that moment 500 years ago, when a Spanish peasant in his field encountered someone coming over the hill and said, "Listen, it's round, it's not flat." And they looked out across the horizon, and suddenly reality changes. their perception of what is real, what's possible, what the meaning of that horizon is, and what lies beyond it was transformed in that instant. I think we're in a similar moment today. That is, that we can see already big revolutions in physics, biology, chemistry, and mathematics that are all converging to produce a radical transformation of scientific and technological potentials. In part, they're being driven by new tools, and new tools have always pushed the frontiers of science. We couldn't have done DNA without X-ray crystallography, for example. Among the most important tools, obviously, is computing technology. That's changed everything. I see enough of you are my contemporaries that when we went to school, it was slide rules still. And my son, I actually showed him my old K&E and said, this is what Daddy used, right? He said, what's that? You draw lines with it or something. Even calculators are passé in an era of PDAs and laptops and so on. But beyond that, of course, are supercomputers, parallel processing, and the ability to do the kind of simulations that were simply unimaginable when many of us were students, modeling fluid flow, for example. The internet that enables communication among scientists. In the old days, if a physicist made a discovery, why he would send an article off to Physics Review, and then it would be sent out for peer review, and then a few months later it might get published, distributed around the world, and then a few months after that, scientists would begin to notice and try some of the experiments to validate or challenge the results, and a few months after that they would send their replies back into Physics Review, and so on. A familiar picture. Now you make a discovery in the morning, you put it on the web by noon, it's being tested by the afternoon, and it's either a new law or history by evening. The pace of scientific change has been transformed by communication. Huge new instruments that we simply never had before. I mean, Hubble is obvious, but all the different kinds of satellite systems that we've engaged in. The future of new space telescopes. I'm particularly interested in interferometric instruments. I love the idea of 4 telescopes out by Jupiter that will be able to resolve the surface of planets around other stars. Scanning tunneling microscopes give us the ability to both see and manipulate individual atoms. Femtosecond cameras that enable us to see chemical processes in real time. Biotools like biochips that enable us to actually do real-time genotyping, and so on. So what we're seeing is an explosion of new scientific tools that give us the capability to explore new domains, smaller, faster, bigger, further, and so on. And there's every reason to believe that those tools will continue, including the computing technology. Computing technology is autocatalytic. That is, it feeds on itself. Better computers lead to better computers. Better computers lead us to better software lead us to better systems lead us to better ways of making computers, and so on around. It feeds on itself. We're all familiar with Gordon Moore's famous Moore's Law, which involved the doubling of computer power and halving of costs every 18 months to 2 years. We've been on that track for basically about 25 years. Unfortunately, Mr. Moore was too pessimistic. That is that we are about to go off the curve in the vertical. That is that we can see already new computer concepts that are in the laboratory today that will accelerate the power, speed, scale of computing by orders of magnitude in the next decade as we move to molecular scale computing, biocomputing, and ultimately quantum computing. If you think about quantum computing, basically in a normal computer, essentially the computational sum is linear. 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Every additional capacity just simply adds linearly. In a quantum computer, it's exponentially. 2, 4, 8, and so on. So a quantum computer made of, let's say, just a modest number of atoms, let's say 100,000 atoms, is 2 to the 100,000th power computational. Now let's try a reasonable number of atoms, a billion. Say 2 to the billionth. That's the kind of computing power that we're looking at. Not 50 years, but probably on the order of 10 to 15 years. So the likelihood that we are going to reach the limits of what we can do in computation is essentially zero. So what we're seeing is the potential for that technology to continue to advance and support advances in science and technology. In addition, of course, now there are big rewards for science and technology. I wear another hat. I'm a venture capitalist. I'm here this morning basically filling in for, I think, Pete Domenici, but I was supposed to be on the panel yesterday, on the venture panel. because, in fact, I'm an investor. And what we're seeing is that there are enormous rewards for science and technology today. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and despite the dot-com bust, the real estate prices have not collapsed, because that was only a small part of, in fact, the enormous explosion of science and technology that are driving the Bay Area today. And the rewards are huge for individuals, for companies, and of course for countries. And everybody has now learned that fact. And so the investment in the scale of money going into science and technology today has never been greater and will continue to grow. So the tools and the finances are all in place to continue to feed the scientific revolution. The first of the revolutions that I see already at hand is physics. There are today many anomalies in our model of the large scale and the very small scale that suggest that, in fact, we are near a revolution. That is, that I suspect we are smelling sort of the whiff of Ptolemaic epicycles in many of the models today, whether they are the standard models of particle physics or the large cosmological models or our models of the origin of the universe. The discovery, for example, that the universe was accelerating, not moving at a decelerating or steady-state speed, simply violates virtually every fundamental assumption about the basic structure of the universe. Something out there is making us go faster. Some strange form of energy that we had not imagined only a few years ago. Einstein's cosmological constant that he had rejected. Some form of anti-gravity. Who knows what? We simply do not know. In fact, a recent meeting held on dark energy, a physicist from the University of Chicago said, we live in a preposterous universe. Maybe we have preposterous models of a fairly ordinary universe. And I suspect that that is more likely the case than the universe being quite as weird as our models. We discovered that some neutrinos have mass. That was the basic definition of a neutrino. It had no mass. Well, what happens if neutrinos have mass? And so on. I could go on. The implication, I spent a lot of time with a number of leading physicists today. I just had dinner with Don Glaser the other night, Ed Witten, and many others. And I think there's a broad sense that we may be near a new synthesis. We are ripe for a new Einstein, or maybe it's string theory. That's possible. Maybe it's Ed Witten is the new Einstein. But these are, I think, over the next 10 to 20 years, likely to lead us to a fundamental reconceptualization of the universe that is as great as happened at the beginning of the last century with Bohr and Einstein, with quantum theory and relativity, and that we will re-perceive what is the nature of reality. If that happens, of course, that's likely to lead, as every major scientific revolution has had before, to fundamental new technologies. It becomes plausible to imagine breakthrough concepts in energy, the use of antimatter, for example. You think about how much antimatter would be required for a propulsion system. We are able today to extract only a few, literally, subatomic particles of antimatter, antiprotons, for example. Well, say to get to the nearest star, it would take about 10 tons of antimatter to get us there. So we have a ways to go in the revolution before we're able to go quite that far, but it is not difficult to imagine today that within the next 20 to 30 years, we could be headed down that road. This could lead to breakthrough concepts of propulsion, like anti-gravity, for example. Again, there's no reason to believe that it is necessarily the case, but it becomes plausible to imagine. Indeed, I am a trustee of something called the Long Now Foundation. The Long Now Foundation was started by Danny Hillis, who created thinking machines, and our goal is to undertake projects that are measured in centuries to millennia. We have built a clock that's on display in the Science and Technology Museum in London. It is the world's slowest computer. It clicks once a year. The cuckoo comes out once a century, and it bongs once a millennium. And we bombed it for the first time last year. You won't hear it bong for the next 1,000 years. We're working on a bigger version, a 30-foot version that will go into the desert in New Mexico, at a site in Nevada that we picked. It's a 10,000-year clock. The objective is to give us a sense of deep time. And we started a number of scientific projects as well. One is what we call the all-species census. That is to collect the identities of all the species on the planet, considering that we've done about 1% so far. So over the next 150 years, we're going to collect the DNA and the identity of every single species on Earth. But we've also started the Starflight project. Basically, the notion is that the fate of the species is very different if we're stuck in our solar system or not. And we've basically discovered that our solar system is a fairly boring place. And that there are some modestly interesting places to go, but if we really want to think about the future, we've got to think about getting out of the solar system. And if we think about it in terms of 1 million years or so for the future of the species, it's a very different thing if we're locked into our solar system or if we've got the universe to roam. So we've set up a project that we figure will take about 1,000 years to reinvent physics sufficiently that we can get out of the solar system. Now, I don't know that we can do it, but I figure about 1,000 years is about the right time. And we're going to be offering a prize when we begin to work with NASA on the best papers every year on Starflight. And we have funded this project and expect to make some steady progress over the next 1,000 years towards Starflight. The revolution in physics is also underway, and you could call it, chemistry, pardon me, precision chemistry. Chemistry was used to be basically about cooking things. You put a bunch of stuff in a pot, and you add a bit of heat, and the thermodynamics teaches you eventually the right molecules collide, and you get the right stuff out of it. But it's a messy, dirty process, and very inefficient. If you could get the atoms and the molecules to go where you wanted them to, and line the way you wanted them to, you could save an awful lot of energy, an awful lot of resource, and it would be a whole lot less messy. And you could do things you couldn't imagine today. Well, precision chemistry is moving in that direction toward building self-replicating molecules, controlling the molecular orientation of individual molecules, controlling individual bonds, releasing a single electron in the outer orbit of a molecule and lining it up with exactly the right electron on another atom and lining it up perfectly. And of course, the increasing use of computational methods to predict the nature of chemical processes and materials, all of which are going to give us new powers in terms of chemistry. But the really big revolution if physics and chemistry wasn't enough is biology. And the revolution has already happened. The science of the last 20 years of molecular biology and genetics is truly revolutionary science. It has changed the nature of biology itself. Biology was an empirical science. It was basically taxonomy. It was describing what was there. But understanding the mechanisms of biological systems and controlling them was simply incomprehensible. It was wet, not dry chemistry, if you will. Wet physics, not dry physics. And we didn't know how to deal with wet systems. What molecular biology and genetics have given us is the means of a scientific paradigm revolution that transforms biology into a rational science in the ways that physics and chemistry are already. The ability to control and predict, the ability to manipulate systems and build them from bottom up. And that's where we're headed with biology. And the results we're seeing in medicine already. You saw the breakthrough drug announced a few weeks ago, Gleevec, which is the first targeted drug, i.e. where we knew precisely the biological and chemical structure of the gene target we were aiming for, the cellular target we were aiming for, and designed a molecule to fit it. Nearly every drug trial program underway today is of that character. We are the largest early-stage biotech investors in the country, and the range of technologies that you can see underway today to repair and redesign cellular structure is astonishing. We will be able to eliminate most diseases in the next 10 to 20 years, cancer, heart disease, and so on. I can tell you that in the next few weeks, a major breakthrough will be announced in one of the most critical degenerative diseases that I suspect worries most of us. I can't tell you what it is today, but it'll be in the headlines in the next 2 weeks. One of our companies made a radical breakthrough in one of the major diseases of aging, announced in 2 weeks. And we'll be able to repair almost all the infirmities of aging. The nature of medicine itself is about to change. The new term is regenerative medicine. And regenerative medicine is about teaching the body to repair itself in the way your body repairs itself when you get a cut on your finger. But doesn't repair itself when it's your liver that's going wrong, or your brain, or your lungs, or your heart. Regenerative medicine, you already see the first signs of in stem cells, the ability to essentially re-inject your body with stem cells, preferably your own, and grow new tissue, new hearts, new livers, new kidneys, new cartilage, and so on. We're going to look back at today's medicine the way people look back with horror before modern medicine, when barbers were dentists, before anesthesia, before we knew about bacteria, before modern surgery, before modern medicine. And people will say 20 or 30 years from now, you mean you used to cut open people? You mean you used to pour nasty chemicals throughout their bodies and kill a whole bunch of cells? It will look unbelievably primitive. We'll have surgery for trauma, but almost all surgery will go away. And we will literally be repairing bodies from the gene up. Having said that, the implication is truly profound. Not only are we going to be healthy much, 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 much longer, but many of us in this room will live to be 120, 150, perhaps 170, at biological age 40, because we're going to start backwards, many of us, in the not-too-distant future. It's already possible in crude and simple ways. You can have your eyes lasered and get the eyes of a child if you want, like my wife did recently. You can get rid of your bald spot up here, gentlemen. We already know how to extend childbearing years for you women. Many of you haven't had your children yet. You're still in luck. There are all of those things which are available today, but we're at the edge of literally fundamental treatments for the aging process itself and the ability to reverse the age of cells, individual cells in the body. Today, outside of Boston, there's a company called Advanced Cell Technologies that has a group of cows, which I call the immortal cows. Now, this is not a raw group. This is 6 cows that are clones of an adult cow, and the important thing about them is that they're maturing but not biologically aging. They're becoming adult cows, but they are not getting older biologically. They may be immortal, we don't know. We obviously won't know for a long time. Maybe something else will kick in. But the truth is we have adjusted the way in which the body produces an enzyme called telomerase in those cells. And the telomeres in their cells are not shortening the way they are in the rest of us, which is one of the key mechanisms of aging. So this is going to be a really, really, really big change. Human lifespans are going to double over the next 20 to 30 years, and they will become vastly longer over the next century. We are going to obviously be able to create new kinds of organisms, small scale and large scale. And one of the great challenges is what happens when the new species begin to emerge on the planet. New species of what we once were. And that will all come to pass over the next 20 to 30 years. Now these revolutions in physics and chemistry and biology all converge at the nanoscale. And that's where the real revolution is happening. We're already seeing it with MEMS, mechanical electromechanical systems, micro-electromechanical systems, but nanotechnology is coming even sooner than we think. And this is the ultimate industrial revolution. The ability to build devices up, from the bottom up, the way nature builds things. Imagine if nature had built this building the way nature builds a tree, with some software and ambient resources. And that's basically that all the software is the DNA, the ambient resources with air, water, and soil provide, and lo and behold, fairly soon there emerges a fairly complex and large-scale structure called a tree. Imagine if we could program materials to do the same thing to design a building. That is not implausible in the next 20 to 30 years. So we're looking at a real revolution in physics, science, physics, chemistry, and biology, all converging into nanotechnology. And of course, with it comes a shift in worldview. The shift from a flat world, the view, the Einsteinian relativistic world. We are moving toward new views of reality. And the net result of all of these together are leading toward what Werner Vinge has called a technology singularity. That is somewhere out there 30 years in the future, it's becoming extremely difficult to imagine what the world will really be like. I just had the experience of having to do it for Steven Spielberg for a world of 2080. And I can tell you, it's a real challenge if you take it seriously in terms of the science and the technology. Indeed, it becomes virtually certain that sometime in the next 30 to 50 years, the machines will wake up. Not AI as we know it, but that there will be some form of computational intelligence that will emerge in computers and computer networks. And the only question is, will they'll be interested in talking to us? And for our own sake, it seems to me that we need to pursue rather dramatically the technologies of amplified intelligence. There are going to be some smarter critters on the planet. They're going to be in silicon probably. And it's important to figure out who's going to be in charge. And I think intelligence will be a determining factor. And so we're going to have to boost our own intellectual capabilities. And so one of the challenges of the biological revolution is to produce people with IQs of, say, 300 to be able to compete with the machines. So That's the science and technology revolution. Economics. We are in the middle of a huge economic transformation, one which I call the long boom, and it's being driven by two fundamental sets of phenomena. One is globalization. The end of the Cold War not only ended the threat of nuclear war, but it made possible a single global economy. Before we were two economies, now we are one global economy. And that has a huge impact in one fundamental way. The last great wave of economic growth in the 50s and 60s was concentrated in US, Europe, and Japan. That was roughly 500 million people. Now it is US, Europe, and Japan, but it's also China, India, parts of Russia, parts of Central Asia, a little bit of Africa, most of Latin America, even parts of the Middle East. This time it'll be somewhere on the order of 4 billion people that get to play in the new global economy. 6 to 8 times as many people as the last wave of growth. All hungry for everything that we have, all willing to work hard to get it, all getting educated, building the capabilities to do it, all over the planet. And it is very likely that we will see growth rates that will lead us to have on the order of another 3 or 4 billion people entering the global middle class over the next 20 to 30 years as global population growth slows down and economic growth continues. The new formula in the developing world is clear. Open societies with educated workers and people grow. That was the story of Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, and so on. And the world is learning the formula, and is spreading around the world, and we'll see more and more of what we used to think of as developing countries growing rapidly, modernizing, developing their capabilities. There are several parts of the world I'll return to in a few moments in geopolitics that are not on this wave of growth. And then we're also seeing, of course, big waves of technology, information technology, biotechnology, fuel cells and new energy sources, and ultimately nanotechnology, all leading to rising productivity, all leading to new industries. I mean, no one was making biochips a few years ago. No one had that job. That job now exists in a bunch of companies making biochips. We're going to continue to do that again and again. The combination will lead to a vastly more educated workers and much, much higher productivity. And so what we're leading toward is a world of sustainable high levels of economic growth driven by this process of globalization and driven by the wave of technology. But there are 3 big risks that may stop us from achieving that great potential. The first is protectionism. That is the desire to protect our own domestic economy at the expense of others. NAFTA was one of the most important things we did in the last decade. There are constant pressures. We saw the demonstrations in Seattle. We recently saw them in Ottawa. We've seen them in Davos, of people who are against the process of globalization. And I think it's almost immoral to lock the poor of the world into their poverty by preventing them to get access to the global economy. The protectionism is the first. Second is the environment. Clearly, if we develop this prosperity while destroying the Earth's environment, this is not a better future for all of us. Fortunately, what we can see is that the technology revolution that is at hand will provide most of the answers we need to most of the environmental problems we face. Many years ago, Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Explosion, The Population Bomb, did us a favor. He warned us about population, and we did something about it. It showed that we can actually affect the trajectory of history. But he had an equation in his first book, which is that impact equals population times affluence times technology. And so if you think about the future, where the leverage is, well, we're already slowing down population growth nearly everywhere except Central Africa. Most people do want to end up well off, so we want to keep the affluence going. So the real leverage is in the technology. And fortunately, we can already see in nearly every phase of technology, whether it's transportation and all the energy use associated with it, electricity production, industrial production, and so on, an enormous array of technologies. And indeed, for example, I think we're about to see a revival in nuclear power in the United States that is being driven by concerns about CO2. And so the range of technology options we're now seeing is huge. We might even see a return to the idea of space-based solar power. But the historic assumption that economic growth was in conflict with environmental quality has now changed. The faster we grow, the cleaner we get. The poorest places on the planet are the dirtiest places. So we need to grow fast, to develop our technology, to turn over our technology and capital stock to get cleaner. New cars are much cleaner than old cars. New factories are cleaner than old factories, and so on. And most of all, we need to get the Chinese, the Indians, and the poor of the world the most advanced technology in the world, not the oldest technology. So that's the economics. Finally, the big risk is geopolitics. The world had enormous economic potential before World War I. We were at a similar moment in time, and we blew it. The leadership of the world, of the U.S., Europe, and Asia, led us into World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. The leadership post-World War II mostly got it right. Truman, Marshall, de Gaulle, Churchill, and so on. And we ended up with 50 years of relative peace and prosperity. The fundamental question is, what's the strategy for the future today? Recently, my firm did some work for something called the Hart-Rudman Commission, which was established by the Congress of the President in the last administration to advise the new President on the fundamental long-term security posture of the United States. Their report is now publicly available, but we did the long-term scenarios for that. And there were three scenarios that were relevant to our concerns here today. The core scenario that everybody wanted was what we called the democratic peace. And you can imagine what that scenario looks like. Prosperity, peace, and democracy everywhere. It's a happy story. However, there were several other possibilities. The one that everyone focused most on was a scenario we called the rogue superpower. We talk about rogue powers, but in fact the rest of the world sees it slightly different. It's the US as Microsoft. Big, powerful, strong, and nobody likes you much. And we've just seen one of the first fruits of that in the UN being thrown off the UN Human Rights Commission by our good friends, the French. Being the biggest gorilla is not the way to be the best friend. The world does not love us much anymore. We want to be loved. We are very powerful, but what we are going to find ourselves in is increasingly isolated rather than isolationist. We are going to see the Europeans turning against us, the Japanese, Asia, and we are going to find ourselves very much alone in the world. U.S. triumphalism, U.S. power and technological and economic superiority are not welcome all over the planet. The U.S. model of economic development and the way in which our economy works is not universally admired. Singapore, France, Germany, Sweden, these are the models that most people turn to today, not America. We are the rogue superpower of the world. National missile defense, we don't play by Kyoto, we don't play war crimes trial, we don't try to sign the law of the seas, we don't play by the same rules as everybody else. They don't apply to us, and now they are turning the corner on us. The second scenario is what we call Job's world, a world of many, 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 many small problems, being nibbled to death, as it were. Terrorism, crime, environment, economic decay, a very familiar scenario. Think Blade Runner. And then the final scenario we call the technology singularity, that explosion of technology. If we continue the way we're going today, we are headed toward that rogue superpower scenario. That is where we're headed at the moment, in terms of geopolitics. And it is, I think, one of the great challenges for the current administration to see if they can frame a new vision that enables global integration to unfold in a positive way. Because at the moment, it isn't moving in that direction. There are three big challenges geopolitically. And they're obvious. Russia, first of all. Modernizing Russia, improving conditions in Russia, making Russia a normal nation. A nation of laws, a civil society, a participant in the global economy. Russia still has thousands of nuclear weapons and thousands of missiles, and we had better make sure that they're friends rather than enemies. The second is obviously the Middle East, which continues to be a tinderbox and has been the source of almost every major conflict of the last several decades. It continues to be a critical issue. And Central Africa, from Sudan to the northern border of South Africa, will be the greatest horror that the human species has ever experienced. 50 to 100 million people die of AIDS, starvation, and disease, and war. What we are seeing is the Malthusian disaster actually happening in Africa. And unfortunately, the world will do nothing about it, and we will see literally tens, if not hundreds of million people die in Central Africa over the next 25 to 50 years. I don't see any way that we can change that. So where does this all take us in the end? At least two very different visions of the future. One, the long move, a world of prosperity for the great many all over the planet, a world of sustainability, ecological sustainability, a world of peace with strength and strong alliances. America as inspired people, helping to lead the world, not being isolated from it. A world where space exploration is part of the great dream of our people. It's fed by the technology singularity. It's where we can dream big dreams. Returning to the moon, establishing a science base on the moon. maybe heading toward Mars, building the kind of vehicles that many people in NASA are exploring today. And I applaud Dennis Tito, space tourism. I don't know how many of you... If I had the funds, in an instant, in a heartbeat, I would have got there. And I just don't get it in NASA. They don't get it. You know, that they're our servants. It's our ships. It's not theirs. And the space shuttle, I paid for it. They didn't. I want to ride. Real simple. It's not yours, NASA. It's mine. It's ours. It's all of ours. And we get to ride on it if we can pay for it. Okay. The other scenario is a much worse scenario. A world that I call a fragmented world. A world of two tiers economies. Of the rich and the very poor. Of small-scale and large-scale violence. Of eco-disasters. Of people challenged to survive. Of global warming and climate change. And the militarization of space. I believe that we have an obligation to our children to try to make the long boom happen, while being prepared for the fragmented world, because we do not control the future. But I live as if the long boom is happening, because I think that's the best way to make it happen. Thank you very much.
We have a couple of questions. We've got about 5 minutes before the next speaker. Yes.
The speaker, do you believe that apoptosis, which we believe limits our human lifespan to something like 100 years, whatever, do you think we're going to beat that one fairly soon?
Yes, I do. I can't say very much about it, but in fact that relates to the discovery I'm talking about. That relates, in fact, to the discovery that I was talking about, that you will hear about in a few weeks. Yes. Other question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, as sort of a follow-up to that, and this idea is actually from a science fiction story about biological immortals. People with 800,000 years of life to protect. Do you see such people as possibly becoming risk-averse? If I'm going to die in 20 years, I'm going to take that ride into space. If I get blown up, well, them's the breaks. If I'm going to die in 1,000 years, suddenly the shuttle doesn't look so attractive.
Well, you know, it's an interesting question. But if you think back to the end of the last century, when human lifespans were 35 to 45 years on average, 49 long, that was kind of the average of wealthy people, 49 years. Most of us in this room would be dead if we'd been living at the end of the last century. Have we become much more risk averse because we've doubled our lifespans in the last century? And I think the answer is no. Few of us still manage to take risks. What?
I think so.
You think we're more risk averse today than we were a century ago? Oh, say what?
Take a vote?
Not here.
No, not in this room, but I mean, overall, I think this country.
This country, that's different. We as people, as individuals, you think we are more risk averse? Well, that's interesting.
No, I do.
You do? Well, that's another opinion. I don't think so. I think we're still taking great risks. And I used to be on the board of Formula One racing. I don't know. It seems to me there's still an awful lot of folks out there willing to take risks. So, you know, the answer is we're declining. We're not going to deal with this. I see it slightly differently. I see it as an opportunity to undertake really long-term projects, like going to the stars, like science projects that take centuries, like actually cleaning up the environment, like ending poverty, and so on. Things that take a long time. So I'm not all troubled by that. Yes, sir?
Do you think our political system allows us to pursue very long-term goals?
No. That's why we're doing it outside the political system. No.
Okay, then I retract my hand raising earlier, thinking about a complete future.
Yes, sir.
Continuing with Dennis Tito, just generally, who do you think should be the next tourist? Some prominent journalist or scientist or someone of a more serious nature, or a pop star that everybody in the public knows about and seems to want to be anyway. And that would draw their attention to that.
I wouldn't choose to answer the question. The question is, who should be the next Dennis Tito? And I'm not sure I'd choose the answer other than myself. But since I can't afford the price of a ticket yet, I'm not in the list. But I think I'm quite open to that. Actually, years ago, I had a project to take a bunch of folks up on the shuttle when it was, in theory, the price was $18 million a flight. That was in the 70s, and projections of what the flights were going to cost. We were going to make a movie up there. Obviously, at $600 million or $1 billion a flight, you can't do that. But I don't, I think it's a market question. I'd like to see us have a market for people who are willing to ride in space and willing to sell the tickets. And let's have an eBay auction for the next ticket on a ride. And let's see who's the highest bidder. Let's pay for the space flight program out of the private sector. People willing to pay for rides. 20, you don't have to get a whole lot of $20 million rides if it begins to add up. What, 20 million here, 20 million there, it begins to become a little money soon. Yeah.
What do you think about ETs and safety?
AT and safety.
ET, extra.
Oh, extraterrestrials. Oh, yes. Boy, that's a tough question. Honestly, I think the universe is a really big thing. It's really big, and I'm sure there's some other guys out there. I just think they're probably not in our neighborhood, or we might have seen them already. So the likelihood of life in the universe, I think, is virtually certain. The likelihood of life in our neighborhood, astronomically, is probably not very high. So I don't know if we'll ever meet them physically, but there's a pretty good chance that someday we'll find them and communicate with them. So I'm fairly confident that there's other folks out there, but I'm not at all sure about seeing them anytime soon. Thank you all. Thank you.
You're more than welcome to stay with us, but I understand you have another...
I've got to stay for the next talk.
Oh, good. Excellent. And our next speaker, a good intro, Robert L. Sackheim. Sackheim, as my Norwegian friends might pronounce it. He's Assistant Director and Chief Engineer for Propulsion at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, and was Assistant Director of Space Propulsion for that center. His short bio is also in our program, and with that, Bob, would you come up and tell us about propulsion and a few other things? Bob Sackheim.
Well, the title of the talk in the program I saw was Nuclear Propulsion. Well, a little more than that. First, I want to point out that non-politically, most of us applaud the Tito venture from an achievement sense. The only problem, it cost them $100,000 a pound to get there. And we can do a lot better than that. So we're going to work on that. Also, I probably owe more of the shuttle the previous speaker, but I want to thank him for the introduction. I took a 1/3 cut in salary to take this job, and I'm looking forward to doing my best to help make things happen. Anyway, I'm going to talk about what's happening in propulsion, and I come from Marshall Space Flight Center, where there's a lot of things going on now, and it's sort of a very interesting, exciting time. I enjoyed the previous talk because I've sort of looked at the geopolitical factors myself, and in other forums I've talked about the analogy between where we are today and possibly where the European continent was somewhere at the end of the 15th century, when they were starving to death. There were vague new diseases, bubonic plague. People were risk averse. No, they weren't. They were afraid of sailing off the end of the earth. So there's sort of some analogies. Technologies were just starting for the time. We've made such great strides. Then I jump ahead to the beginning of the 21st century, and I look back at some simple statistics, and I see we started the 20th century with barely over 1 billion people. I don't care where they are. And we finished the last century somewhere over 7.2. If you plot that over time, known civilization doesn't look too good for the ecological system by any means. So I want to go to Mars. Now, I won't make it, but I sure as heck hope my grandkids can do it, or my great-grandkids, and I'm sure do what I can to help. So let's talk about what we're doing to try and get the technologies in place to start that process. And I'll just give you a quick rundown. At Marshall, we have a lot of interesting things going on. We play a major role in a lot of NASA's activities. And I, for one, think there are some really interesting things going on. And in recent times, we had the fortitude to decide that something wouldn't work. We'll stop it. There'll be a controversy about that. But we did it. And some people were unhappy. Some people were happy. But we're going on a new direction. And I'm going to describe a major new initiative that just kicked in here. In fact, if you read Space News and the other journals, you'll find that there's been a lot of contracts awarded, some 22 that are still in the process of being awarded, and this time those contracts are going to focus on developing technology first and let the technology enable the missions to do the things you want to do in space. If the technology don't make it, then we'll drop them and try something else. We've had some problems in the past with excitement and enthusiasm by trying to put up programs defining requirements that we don't know how to meet, and then get in a panic and way underfunded efforts to try and force the technology to occur. But I think we've learned a lot, and so I'm going to talk about what's going on. Okay, so we've got a major piece of the space station. Regardless of what people think about it politically or any other way, it's here. It's going to be here for a long time. We're committed. There's people living on it. So we've achieved a goal that was defined in the early 80s, or maybe by Werner von Braun in the 60s, permanent presence of humans in space. That's the beginning. The space shuttle is a great machine that, again, came to us under controversial conditions, but it's had a great record. NASA has some unique missions. We have to put people in space, we have to service them, we have to keep them healthy, and shuttle and its successors will be doing that for a long time. The second generation, I'm going to talk about at length. Another thing we've done is we've taken a little thought here to define space transportation going beyond big smoke and fire rockets that put you in low Earth orbit. Space transportation is not over until you get to the place you want to go, whether it's manned or unmanned, or peopled or unpeopled, and that's where a major role for nuclear propulsion exists, in my opinion. And then we're doing a bunch of technologies, developing some of these advanced systems, working on some research for a change. Now, at this point, one other success, which was the Chandra X-ray telescope, talking about the ETs. We're going to try and find out what's out there that could enable life on the trillions of stars, every one of which could have a solar system around it. The discovery rate has been fantastic, and it's been a great accomplishment. But my job at Marshall, and the majority of what we do, is to develop new space transportation technologies, propulsion being a major one. And this sort of talks about some of the other mission goals we support. We are, again, looking at space solar power. Things keep changing. We talk about whether you believe in the economics or not. The studies show that there are some potential benefits as the technology advances. We can do some things. Climate monitoring and possibly someday control. I mean, I come now, pardon my accent, but I come from Northern Alabama. And that's why I have a Northern accent. But anyway, we have great ample warnings for tornadoes now. They used to get people by surprise. That's true over the country. I'm amazed at how accurate some of the weather predictions are. And so that's a great breakthrough. You're aware of all that, but all of that's enabled by space propulsion and rockets, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. So we sort of organized the sequence into what we call generations of reusable launch vehicles. Today, the first generation is the space shuttle, and it's a partially reusable vehicle, but it's really shown some technology advances. I'll point out the main engine, the space shuttle main engine. An automobile has a horsepower to weight ratio of about 0.5 in its engine. The best jet engines flying today have horsepower to weight of about 19. The space shuttle is 100. And the stresses of making that a reusable system to fly up and down like a space liner has been a long development process to meet those the design requirements, to meet those stresses, and so we've learned a lot. And using that, we're now beginning the second generation. The goals here are 10 times cheaper and 100 times safer. Whether we can achieve that or not remains to be seen. But I like using the Tito flight as a model because that makes it a lot easier since we're already trying to beat 100,000 now. And then we're going to go on and talk about infrastructure, both in space and on the ground. The airline industry, we dream about having space liners that look like airliners. It took World War II really to develop the concept of ground controls, logistics, and we're not even close to that in spaceflight. I'll just point out another interesting problem. The energy it takes to go someplace in space, if we're going to do some really deep exploration. This is the velocity you have to add to the vehicle carrying whatever, people, equipment, to get that far. Each AU is one equivalent distance from the sun, 93 million miles. We've been operating down here. There's the moon over here, Mars up there. There's a lot of talk, discussion by the scientists to get out here. In fact, some of them want to go to the sun. We're going to try and go at night, of course, because it's awfully warm out there. But you know, you're talking about an awful lot of energy. You can't do that today with chemical propulsion. So that's where nuclear starts to look very attractive. The other advantage is, when you talk about Earth orbit, by my calculations, somewhere as you enter low Earth orbit, you need a thrust-to-weight gradient 1. I know I'm in Mexico, but you know there's only one way to do that. You need a thermal energy source. There's only two sources. One is chemical. The other is nuclear. It'll be a while before we light off open cycle nuclear thermal rockets, at least on the surface. So we're going to be doing chemical propulsion for a long, long time, and we're going to focus on developing more advanced systems. But out here, it's effective delivery of energy that counts. Thrust is not so important. You can thrust longer and much higher efficiencies. And so all the things you've heard about, electric propulsion and even way out solar sails and other advanced things are coming into play and are part of our new program, which I'll talk a little bit about. But you can see the challenge is formidable. Science has an important force. Scientists are an important force in our society, outside of NASA and outside of other agencies in the government. They have a lot of support. This is just a chart showing here we are in our solar system. They want to get out here to the Kuiper Belt, the edge of interstellar space. And here's Alpha Centauri. This is a logarithmic scale, way, way out. That's the nearest star, 4 light years away. And you can see, again, it's an energy scale. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to do science out here. But remember, the good thing about that is a lot of what goes on out there influences our lives on Earth. That's an important factor. Solar storms and all that. So there's good reason to go out there and find out. Once we come in near Earth weather, we need to deal with interstellar weather forces. This chart, this is just a sort of bar chart to show, here's chemical propulsion, the best energy density available and the best rockets. I could have put fluorine, hydrogen here, but I didn't. Fluorine's even tougher than nuclear rockets. So we're talking about hydrogen and oxygen. Here's nuclear fission out here. That has an awfully attractive offering in terms of the way we would use it in space. And more important, we need power in space. So once you get out there with a safe nuclear reactor delivering power, you have the options to go to Pluto, and we'll get this controversy whether it should be downrated to a comet or not over by looking at it. Currently, if we try to go to Pluto with our best chemical rockets, I think we have enough energy for a brownie box camera, a flashlight, and one snapshot. What we want to do is put a synthetic aperture radar around that thing in orbit, and that's going to take nuclear propulsion and nuclear power to energize the instruments that will be aboard. So here's where I think we want to go. Of course, fusion would be great, but we're working on it. There's issues, there have been issues, there's technology to develop, and this center of nuclear technology has put a lot of effort into it. There's a lot of other people, and that's coming along. But I think fission for now has got some real possibilities for the near term. The antimatter solution is very promising from an energy offering point of view, but there's a lot of technology issues, and those of you who are not risk adverse, you can come to our lab. Just tell me when you're coming so I can be far away and work on anything on it and see how it goes. But we'll get there someday. This is just sort of a map. I'm not going to go through the specifics, but it makes my point about down here where you're launching heavy mass, you want high thrust to weight, and that's chemical. Out here where you want, and of course chemical has a limitation, specific energy and efficiency. Out here in space, you have a whole range of things you can do. Where thrust isn't so important, it's impulse, force times time, that get you where you want to go if it's delivered in a very efficient way, and lots of things out there are doing that now. We've made some great breakthroughs in electric propulsion. Electric propulsion, which is now flying on a number of commercial satellites, gives you 10 times the specific energy of an average satellite chemical propulsion system. So we're going to do technology development up here and down here, and hopefully we got a balanced program that makes a lot of sense. These are some of the dreams. I saw General Warden's on the program. I'm sure if he was here, he'd like this chart. These are some of the space liners that we'd like to develop someday, but in my mind anyway, and some others as well, getting a single-stage, non-stage system into space takes an incredible energy development and advancement. The structural factors have to be extremely low. We need new materials, we're getting those, or we need what we're calling a little bit of cheating in launch assist. Here's a magnetic levitation system. We're actually testing a tramp now to give you a little acceleration boost. If the environmentalists would let us, we put on top of Pikes Peak, not too far from here, or Sandia Mountains, that gives additional boost. But it's going to have to take a lot of energy to get to a single stage orbit. I think one way to do that, and we have programs that are in place to look at the technology first. It's very controversial again, whether we can make it work and pay off, is to use air in the most efficient way before you get into space. Not with wings and not with landing gear and spars and struts, but to gulp it free. If we can figure out how to get it in without a lot of drag, get extremely high efficiencies because the air is effectively free. Again, you're talking about chemical high thrust ISPs or specific energies now that are, again, 10 times better than we do with the best all rocket systems. Remember, rockets are just jets that carry their own oxidizer. Jets are the same kind of expulsion systems, but they get the air for free. That's why they're more efficient. Other configurations include two-stage, and that's a big benefit. By just 2 stages gives you a tremendous boost in other technologies we're looking at. And this time we're going to let these technologies see how far they can go. We just awarded about $765 million of the first phase of what could be a $4.5 billion program to develop these technologies first. What you see is a notional space liner. It's not any X vehicle. It may never come to fruition, but it's a notional liner. It involves all of the government agencies who have something to offer, including the Air Force and the various NASA centers, where there's a lot of good technology and materials. To me, what we call mass fraction, the inert weight that you need to carry propellant, and the other guidance systems and so on, developing the materials to get that number as high as possible. The ratio of useful propellant to inert weight is just as important as specific fuel consumption. So all that's going on in, I think we're at sort of an historic moment. While that's going on, I'll point out, this is of course my own vision, if you will, that I've taken from participating in a lot of these things. While that's going on, we had another difficult lesson here about 2 years ago. Many people are aware of that. We tried to launch 2 Mars missions simultaneously for probably half the price or less of the Pathfinder mission, which was so successful. That was the bouncing ball that landed on Mars with airbags and put out the little Sojourner. We learned that maybe we went a step too far this time. That program cost about $275 million. We had 3 navigators trying to navigate to Mars. That's tougher than getting around Albuquerque, I'll tell you. It's really tough. It's close though. Coming in the airport last time, I'm not sure. But anyway, 3 navigators were trying to steer 3 Mars missions. You don't get height perception in navigating to the planets. You've got Doppler radars, you've got linear line of sight type measurements. It were a lot of jokes made about the units on one of the failures, but that was an error, sure. But there were plenty of messages showing big error dispersions that something was wrong, but everybody was so frantically busy in this faster, better, cheaper mode, which had a lot of merit. I don't want to get to the politics of that, but I think we've learned to back off a little bit. So now, and then of course the Mars Pole lander, nobody knows what happened to that. We keep asking it to call us, but it won't. But now we've got a long-term program in place. Before you put people on Mars, you got to know what you're putting on, what you're dealing with. Chemically, the surface, Mars has an atmosphere, so there's weather, there's all these issues, and you got to know what you're dealing with. And our goal is to sort of architect a mission called the Mars Sample Return Mission, which ultimately will return as, again, lots of arguments. Can't you do in situ science? Well, yes and no. I won't go into all of that, but it's a big, broad panel of scientists addressing that. The program now seeks to put in a Mars sample return system that will have a Mars ascent vehicle, MAV, that will bring the sample back by sometime around 2011, and that will be the precursors to start to talk about possibly putting humans in there in the second decade, sometime late in the second decade of the century. And again, it's a political forcing function if we go or not. We have absolutely the technology to do it. It's a policy issue. We have the instruments. Anyway, we're working on all these advanced systems to enable that. And of course, as you all know, there are many, many non-nano, highly macro elements to making vehicles that fly into outer space and through the solar system. And that includes aerodynamics and heating and re-entry and all that, and all those technologies are going on. Well, I talked about the possibilities, and I repeat that, the possibilities, because we don't know if we can achieve it or not, of having a true space liner and a fleet as such, where people a lot less rich than Dennis Tito can fly up there for maybe a few $100 a pound. Anyway, or less. We're looking at hypersonic propulsion, again, these combined cycle systems that go air breather like jets for as long as they can get the air, and switch over to rocket power as they leave the atmosphere. And a lot of technology, we've actually got the biggest propulsion companies in the country to now team, and we have an interesting program called ISTAR, which is addressing all these issues of supersonic combustion, which is tough, and gulping air at supersonic velocity inlet velocities is also very tough. But the first step is underway. Sometime, hopefully late next month, out at Edwards Air Force Base or Dryden, there will be a vehicle that will address a supersonic scramjet. It's called HyperX. It'll be dropping this little, basically, as you can see, for a fast-flying air-breathing system, the whole vehicle is almost propellant and inlet, drives the configuration very strongly. We're going to drop this thing off, accelerate to about Mach 7 or 10, through a series of flights, and see if the fire will light at supersonic inlet rates and sustain itself and stay where it should be and give us significant thrust over drag. So that's exciting. Again, I sort of like the technology ideas. This chart sort of makes my point. I mentioned earlier about how tough it is to have a reusable rocket engine. Jets are very efficient, and I ride on them, so I want them to be very safe. But and they get serviced a lot more readily, as you know. But here again, the horsepower weight's 19 for these are military jet fighter numbers. Here's the SSME, the Space Shuttle main engine, delivering about close to 80,000 horsepower now with a new pump, and it's about 100 horsepower weight. That just says the operating pressure and the stresses are much greater. To keep reusing this in that environment takes some real technology advances, and that's what we're going to focus on. And above all, when you fly, you need to conserve weight. Well, I talked about the in-space stuff, and there's some really interesting things going on there. There's a whole bunch of missions being defined now. I think another there, which gets into a little bit of politics, was that in the past, and I'm sure Dr. Schmitt remembers this, in the past there was a lot of bickering, let's say, or controversy between all the NASA centers which was divisive and sometimes wasted effort that could be better devoted to developing technologies. I think we've sort of transcended some of that now, and a lot of the centers are cooperating and doing what they do best, which is good for the country. And by the way, I spent 35 years in industry before I came there, and I ended up, as I was leaving, recognizing that our job is a great value for the stockholders. Since I was one, I believed in that. I believe our value at NASA is a great value for the taxpayers, and I've been one for a lot longer time than I was a stockholder of my former company, so I'm big on that. Anyway, I'm happy to see us cooperating. The interplanetary and in-space functions are important. Here's that dream of a Mars ascent stage, and by the way, we did that. We landed on the moon. I worked in that program. We landed on the moon. We put people down safely, and we got there. The Russians didn't. They still haven't with people, and we brought them back, and a lot of good technology was developed, and I think that tremendous demonstration was very effective in getting us to where we are today. It was the first step in what probably became the Daytona we have today, more or less. So we'll be working on these technologies. Let me wrap up with a couple other things. I tell you, there's three basic, let's say, resources in space that are important. One is you want mass that's useful. You don't want a lot of, when you launch a rocket today, with the propellant on the launch vehicle and the propellant you have on the upper stage, which is called the payload on top of the launch vehicle, 80 or 90% is just propellant. You'd like that to be less than half. That's where the efficiency story starts coming in, and these everything and so forth. Okay, so mass is one important resource. The other is power. We need power in space. If you're going towards the sun, it's a little bit easier because you can get photovoltaic energy. We have very effective arrays. But if you're going away from the sun, it gets very inefficient. We need nuclear power in space. We need nuclear power. Supposing we spend all that money, we land on Mars. Some people will say the name of the game for life outside of the Earth, Mars being the best candidate, is follow the water. Find water. Well, we can't find it right now. We find an occasional microbe in a rock at the South Pole and say, whoops, must be life at Mars. But if we can find some water on Mars, it'd be really a great step. Some people suggested supposing life is different, they don't need water. But right now, we're going with water, and as the main indicator or precursor for life, and certainly the soil chemistry. And the point is, we need to drill down through rock and whatever, and that's going to take power. We have the drills, we haven't had the power. So again, we need a nuclear reactor. Once we get a reactor, and reactors are safe. They're a lot safer than the RTGs that we've, the radioisotope heat source-driven thermopiles, if you will, or even dynamic machines that we've been launching. The way we're going to do it. Once we have it for power, we can use it for propulsion. Again, 10 times efficiency gain, 10 times less fuel to traverse the space trajectories we need. And we will have an infrastructure up there that could begin to pipe resources back down to Earth. I used to laugh at this. It was Arthur Glasses or Peter Glasses, I can't remember, at a company in Boston there. They came up with this, but what a great thing it would be if we could just, the sun should be good for another 3 to 5 billion years. With the price of oil, it's getting interesting right now that, maybe we can bring some of that power back down again. Electric cars, by the way, are possible. We'd make the oil companies not too happy, which is okay with me, because they don't make me very happy. Anyway, there's infrastructure issues, and I just want to say that I think NASA is changing. We're excited about these new opportunities. We're really looking forward to serving our customers, who are you, and all the other taxpayers. And I guess I just want to wrap up with a chart that says someday we will have an infrastructure on the ground. We will have settlements on the moon and on Mars, I believe. Because we are, even if you drive around here and say, look at all this empty desert, we can develop that, it's easier. And 80% of the world's surface is ocean, we can live under the ocean, it's easier. We're running out of air, good air, breathing air, we're running out of water. This horrible thing that's happening in Central Africa, people are dying for lack of food. Yeah, we can fix it, but it's not happening. We need new resources, we need new energy, and so someday we will have space infrastructure on the ground that lets us fly up like space liners. That someday maybe 30 or 40 years. It only takes the will and the decision to engage your policy. We have the technology here in this community, probably in this room, and other places in the country, and then we'll start having our L1 space settlements up there where people can do some exciting things and do some science and research and do some exploration. Thank you very much.
We've got time for a couple of questions. Back here.
4 years ago, the Space Access Society, in one of their Space Access updates, said that if NASA picked the wrong X-33 vehicle and mismanaged it and blew it, that they would then likely come to us concluding that single stage to orbit was too difficult and shouldn't be pursued further. I think that is a very good prediction as to what has happened and what NASA is now saying in some of its official pronouncements. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, they're right.
Okay. Another question over here next to the camera.
Hey, Bob, we know a little bit more about the surface of Mars today than we did about the moon when we landed men on the surface of the moon some number of years ago.
Yeah, all right.
So my question is, what would hinder us from taking the risk to go to the moon with humans earlier than later?
Well, first of all, I'll remind you that there was a whole set of precursor programs before Apollo, right? There was Lunar Orbiter, there was Rangers, there were probes, we had lots of photographs. We even have photographs of the dark side, you know, a little bit, the fringe anyway. And then we landed, I think, 5 surveyors and did surface samples and did do some, we didn't do chemistry, but we did do some surface topography and all of that. And I think the big thing is, you know, there is no atmosphere on the moon, and we don't have to, you know, we didn't have to worry about what the ammonia or CO2 would do on the moon. I think there are a lot of people who are concerned that there are places on Mars, and I'm not a Mars scientist or a Mars geologist, where you could actually burn through your spacesuit because it's caustic or it's acidic, or, you know, I was interested again in the earlier talk. The earlier speaker talked about risk averse. You know, the military, which still keeps us the strongest country on the earth, is not risk averse. But Americans can't die. I mean, pretty soon there won't be any Americans fighting. There'll be robots. And I'm not kidding. There are robots now, as you well know from your former career, Roger, that are capable of targeting whatever's out there, retargeting in real time, and then launching missiles from concealed sites. You know, Desert Storm, which is our last national recognized engagement, we were all upset about the friendly fire issues and accidents and so on. So, I'm not going to explain the political reasoning behind that, or the media, or all the usual reasons, but this system that we live under, being the best in the world, does not accept risk-taking where people get hurt and killed. I mean, I think the Challenger ranked right up there with Vietnam. And, you know, I think the people who flew knew what they were doing, and I think people who do it again and have done it again, but I just don't think society would accept that.
On that note, we're going to have to stop and take about a 10-minute break, and we mean just 10 minutes, and we'll set up for the morning session. Bob, thank you so much. Appreciate it very much.